France marks 3 years since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The iconic Eiffel Tower in Paris lit up today in the colors of the Ukrainian flag, a show of solidarity with the embattled nation. In the meantime, President Trump says he is hopeful the conflict between Ukraine and Russia may be just weeks from ending. He made those comments today after meeting with fellow Group of 7 leaders in a virtual session. The president is also confident, he says, that the U.S. and Ukraine will soon come to terms on a rare earth minerals deal. Trump wants the United States to get access to the critical minerals to help repay the more than $180 billion the U.S. has given to Kyiv since the start of the war. French President Emmanuel Macron joined the chief executive at the White House for bilateral talks on the conflict.
I think the war could end soon.
Well, how soon?
Within weeks.
Weeks?
Yeah, I think so. Right? Don't you think so? I'd like to have you. I think we could end it within weeks if we're smart.
President Macron says European leaders he's spoken with say they plan to be stronger partners in the defense of the European continent. Trump is set to hold a meeting Thursday with another key European leader, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And joining us now to discuss the Ukrainian-Russian conflict is Professor William Muck with North Central College. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Always good to see you. We have a lot to unpack here, but let's start with the president's latest comments. He says he can end the war in weeks. Is this possible?
I don't think so, right? Because now I think he would like that to happen. I think a lot of us would like the war to end. But the reality is you've got two different belligerents. You've got Ukraine and Russia who have very, very specific interests, and they're not even close, right? So Ukraine wants some sense of protection to make sure that this isn't going to happen again. And Vladimir Putin, it's not clear entirely what he wants, but I don't think he's anywhere near ending the conflict. So Trump may want that. Europe may want that. But until the parties themselves want to bring an end to a conflict, I think we're much, much further away.
Last week, as you know, Professor, the president blamed Ukraine for starting the war when it was Russia that invaded. He and Volodymyr Zelensky have had a back and forth. Can Ukraine win this war without U.S. support?
Well, I don't know if they can win it, but they don't necessarily have to win. They just have to stop Russia, right? So now the question is, if the United States begins to pull some support, which I think is likely, but not all the support pulled, Europe is also likely to step in. I think that's what we've seen over the last couple days. Europe is a much more unified voice now, and they realize the dramatic shift that's happened in the United States, and that they're going to have to step up. And if they want to defend Ukraine, it's going to fall on their plate. So I think there's a realization that if the United States steps away, other actors are going to have to step in. So I think Ukraine is still in a decent position, but it's a much more precarious position without the United States.
So let's talk about these minerals, because that's been an interesting issue that has come up. The president says he wants to finalize an agreement for rights to access Ukraine's natural resources. He says this is payback for all the money the United States has spent supporting that country in this war. Is this a negotiating tactic to get Ukraine to cooperate with the president's plans to end this war sooner than later?
I think so, and it's a realization. I mean, Donald Trump is very transactional, right? The only reason to do something is because he gets something from it, or the United States gets something from it. But it's such a stark contrast with how U.S. foreign policy has been conducted for the last 80 years, right? I mean, it's been very clear that Russia is not an ally, that Russia is an adversary. And I think there's been a lot of commentators talking about, like, Ronald Reagan wasn't transactional. When he was going against the Soviet Union or talking about good versus evil, it wasn't about what resources the United States can get. So I think much of the world has been critical of the United States in this sort of approach to things, and I think it's a fair criticism. I think we should think about what's in long-term strategic interests of the United States, not looking for a land grab or a resource grab.
I want to circle back and allow you to elaborate a bit more on something you brought up earlier. European leaders are siding with Ukraine in this. Would these other countries be able to, I don't know, I guess provide the same support Ukraine needs in this war without the U.S.'s help?
Not the same support, right? I mean, I think the reality is that the United States has been the undisputed leader in defending Ukraine. I mean, think about all of the work that was done during the Biden administration. And the United States really stood up against Russia and stood up for Ukraine. So if the United States pulls back from that leadership role, it's a huge space to fill. And I think Europe will do what they can. I think they're also realizing what's out there, but it is not the same, right? There's one global hegemon, and that is the United States. And if we change our policy and suddenly suddenly shift from supporting Ukraine to supporting Russia, it's a much, much more difficult situation for Ukraine. And I think there are strategic but also moral implications for the type of country the United States is if we make that dramatic shift.
Okay, Professor Willie Muck, thank you so much. Always appreciate your breakdown of what's happening. Thank you so much.
Good
Have a
to be
day.
here.
Yep.